Welcome, everyone, to Indications and Warnings. Welcome, Chuck, to Indications and Warnings Live for the very first time here on YouTube. It is March 21, 2025. It is day 1122 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. Chuck, it's great to be live with you here on Indications and Warnings now.
Great. It's been a while since Indications and Warnings has been live through the magic of our behind-the-scenes producer, Thomas. And thank you, and thanks to everyone who's joined us on YouTube. And we're looking forward to handling your questions live. That's what we like to do, and glad to be doing it.
Yeah, Thomas is a wizard, Chuck. No one ever before has been ever able to make my landline broadcast video.
Yes, absolutely. And I just got a backhanded compliment from Axel, who joins us frequently, and he says, "You're 2 minutes late." So you can't please everybody, folks.
Well, he was 2 minutes early, actually. I think we will allow a few more people to join us. We're just past the top of the hour here. I mentioned earlier, this is the first weekend in the United States of a very popular college basketball tournament, the NCAA tournament. Probably lots and lots of people are watching their favorite basketball team either win or lose, but I don't know how big a crowd we'll have here at Indications and Warnings Live.
Well, we do have lots of news from Ukraine. Just before we went on, folks, we had the pleasure of having our first live guest. That is a show that will be going up here in a couple of days. Professor Rajan Menon of Columbia University joined us. He is a scholar, a geopolitical and military thinker of the highest order, and we discussed what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on from Washington, and what are some things to look forward to near term, midterm, and far term regarding negotiations, a negotiation settlement, and who is actually driving this new circus. It was a very, very good show.
I'm not going to give away the meat of that interview with Rajan, but in the middle of our discussion, it occurred to me, and you and I talked about it briefly, that it suddenly occurred to me that in different ways, both President Biden and President Trump are being too soft on Russia. They are both at fault for being too soft on Russia.
Our joke used to be that Jake Sullivan could be found hiding under the conference table in the Situation Room. He had generalized fear and phobia of Russia, took Putin's nuclear bluster at face value, and frankly, it emerges the national security apparatus advising the president was responsible for constricting the arms flow to Ukraine and perversely taking the credit at the same time. After telling allies no F-16s, getting in front of that as much as they could, and then taking the credit for giving F-16s to Ukraine when, in fact, the United States has still not shipped a single airplane to Ukraine. And I love saying this. Alan hears me say it all the time. We are presently training this many Ukrainian pilots. That's right, folks. I said 2. That's how many were trained.
I think they've been successfully trained, Chuck. So now we are training zero Ukrainians to fly F-16s. But my point about, Biden was soft on Russia by not giving Ukraine everything it needed to defend itself and to defeat Russia militarily. Trump is actually being soft on Russia by conceding everything in advance of real negotiations, and to date, asking from Russia nothing in return. Those are two different ways of being too soft on Russia. They're both at fault.
They both are. You have to wonder about the art of the deal when you start by giving away all of your blue chips to start with. We were speaking last week, and we had this sort of prognosis. The week has ended this Friday, but this past week we've heard clucking noises out of Washington. We've had productive talks. Things are going well. In fact, they're not going well at all. Russia has conceded nothing, asked only for a condition that benefits only itself. Basically, I'll translate their requests. Please stop blowing up our oil refineries. That's how we pay for the war. I think what we'll see next week, and again, looking forward, let's see how Washington reacts. There won't be any progress next week. This is my bold prediction. Then Russia's not going to come around. They're not going to concede anything. They are running under the impression that the war is winnable for them. And categorically, Alan, I don't think that's true.
No, you were among the very first observers of this war to say that Russia could not win this war. I think Putin actually understands he can't win the war now either. That doesn't mean he's going to stop fighting. It simply means that he will try to achieve everything at the negotiating table his military has failed to achieve on the battlefield. And this is where Putin's negotiating team, which is it's the A team that Putin has sent to the negotiations. I don't think Trump is up to it, and I don't think Trump's negotiating team is up to it either. It's not going to end well at the negotiating table.
No, this categorically, look, this is not a real estate deal. Right? This is not a business proposition where both sides are going to decide, what's my profit, what's my loss, what's in it for me. We can look at the Soviet diplomatic corps. Whatever you think of Mr. Lavrov, and my views are pronounced, he is a cunning and wily diplomat who has been in his job for decades, who operates within the Russian royal court system. He knows that he is in there and he's going to deliver for his boss. That's why he has houses in Spain. That's why he flies around in his own jet. I don't see anyone on the American side who can match his cunning, guile, or patience. The Russians are acutely aware that in Washington's mind, this is something that's going to be solved in 24 hours. It isn't. All they've got to do is run out the clock for a couple of weeks. I am only hoping that Washington, having used the stick on Ukraine, finally realizes that Russia can use a little stick too. And that means more military shipments, more weapons, more air defense to Ukraine.
Chuck, the only thing that hasn't been attempted is fully arming Ukraine, giving them everything they need in order to defeat Russia militarily. So that's the only strategy that has so far not been tried. Everything else has been tried. And the other thing that hasn't been attempted, of course, is deploying NATO, American troops on the ground in Ukraine. I sincerely believe had a NATO deployment led by the United States been attempted successfully on the ground in Ukraine the moment Russia crossed the border with its full-scale invasion, this would have been a very short war, not because America and NATO would have defeated Russia, but because there would have been two combatants on the field that didn't want to be fighting each other, and that is America and Russia. They would have negotiated a very quick end to this war, and Ukraine would have been saved.
You know, we can also, I think, safely say this with great bombast and transparent preparations. Russia massed forces on the border. I can remember, Alan, you and I doing shows where we said, look, these guys have been in position sleeping under their vehicles since November, before the full-scale invasion. There was ample time for the United States to deter Russia or make it understand clearly that the invasion would invoke consequences, immediate consequences. Russia didn't apprehend that message from Washington because it was never given. There were people and voices in the United States saying, look, this is an internal matter for Russia, forgetting that Ukraine is a sovereign nation and has been so for, 50 years, 70 years. Russia had apparently nothing to fear from the United States. That's regrettable. Now, 2 million casualties later, arguably, and I would say this, Russia is no closer to realizing the goals of the special military operation than it was the day after it invaded, right? This was supposed to be a coup d'etat, a masterstroke aimed at Kyiv and a regime change. Right now, Russia is 1 million casualties into a war that, frankly, it cannot win. It will never win. And it is Russia's who desperately needs a ceasefire.
It is a war of attrition for both Ukraine and Russia. Putin is racing the Russian economic clock. How long can this Russian economy feed his war machine? I don't think the Russian economy is going to collapse anytime soon, but it can be pushed towards collapse, exactly as Ukraine is doing with its long-range strike on Russian oil refineries, oil depots, etc. That's not the only place to hit the Russian energy infrastructure. There are a lot of other places too. I think your idea of boarding some of the Russian oil tankers in the shadow fleet all around the world, some of those tankers, like the one Germany just seized today, carry cargoes of $40 million worth of oil.
Right. We did have today. We know that this happened. We don't really have a lot of detail, but we can confirm that it did happen. German authorities today seized the Russian very large crude carrier Eventon, carrying 100,000 tons of crude oil. We don't know what the circumstances are surrounding the boarding, what provoked it, what justified this bust. But given the series of Russian, let's just call them generously, seamanship errors in the Baltic, including dragging anchors, severing gas pipelines, severing telecommunications cables, I hope that Germany is providing an example. And again, there's a reason to interdict these vessels. Their crews are not adequately trained. They are not adequately licensed. These vessels are not insured. They don't live up to their requirements for safety of life at sea, and almost none of them have adequate environmental protection equipment on board. So any one of them could be a potential Exxon Valdez, and that's a good enough reason to act as far as I'm concerned.
Well, there's already been such an accident, of course, in the Sea of Azov with these rusting coastal tankers that Russia was using to transport oil, but they chose, instead of going along the coast or or up a river, down a river. They were out in choppy water that did those two tankers in. They actually split apart, and their oil cargoes have probably permanently polluted some of the shores of Crimea now.
Yeah, that's, maintenance is a factor. These vessels that are sailing in service of Putin's sanction busting, they are generally 40 years old. Now, that's old age for a ship, unless you're an aircraft carrier, which it costs, by the way, tens of millions of dollars simply to maintain, not to operate. These things are going to happen. They are absolutely inevitable. We have seen deliberate actions that are hazardous. We recently had a Portuguese flagged Russian crude vessel deliberately collide with an American fuel carrier. We have, as Alan said, the two crude carriers in the Sea of Azov. These were riverine craft, and they were being piloted in open water, where they both foundered by breaking in half. And that suggests to me, Alan, just a little bit of keel maintenance. I mean, just a little problem there.
Well, Chuck, I put on my glasses in an attempt to see some of the comments that our viewers are posting in the live chat, and I do want once again to welcome you all here to the very first live broadcast of Indications and Warnings. Chuck, my glasses aren't helping that much, but I see a question from Tom, and this is going to move the conversation in a slightly different direction, but it's not a bad direction to go. Tom says, my burning question is whether NATO has run the numbers on the cost of 200,000 peacekeepers and their logistics versus fully supporting Ukraine with what they need to win. See, that's an interesting question. It puts that untested strategy of giving Ukraine everything it needs to win in exactly the right context.
I think so. And Tom, thank you for that question. You guys have heard me do this a lot. I try to bring this down to the lowest possible level. So here's a little SEAL nugget. Never send a man where you can send a hand grenade, right? I would also say this: never send a peacekeeping force into contact with a peer adversary, right? Normally peacekeeping forces go in, they're supposed to be the toughest guys. Don't go peer to peer with a peacekeeping operation unless you've exhausted all of your export opportunities. If Ukraine had the Patriot missiles it needed to cover its cities, if it had the mobile air defenses that it could liberate from apartment blocks and put them to the front, before you put boots on the ground, how about a no-fly zone, et cetera? That is a great question. And Alan and I went into, on a previous edition, the dynamics of how would a peacekeeping force work vis-a-vis a near-peer adversary. And I say near-peer with Russia because I'm being very generous. The Russian army is hollowed out. It is defeated on its feet. They are delivering beans, bullets, and Band-Aids by donkey. They would not be any sort of an opponent to a NATO component on the ground in near proximity. But were I Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense, I would say, let's not go there now. Let's give Ukraine what it needs to win the fight.
Well, of course, I totally agree with that, Chuck. I'm scrolling back on the comment panel to catch a couple of the initial questions. And again, we are here with viewers live. I've always said when we did Bullet Points live, it wasn't our show. It wasn't my questions. It was the questions from the listeners who made Bullet Points as good a show as it was. So here's the very first question. Can't quite see who is asking it, but can you explain why European countries can't step up with intelligence? We talked a little bit about that earlier, Chuck.
Right. It was funny just doing a little research before the show. I'm probably going to do this as an article in the Kyiv Post coming maybe week after next. But Europe does have its own intelligence satellites. The French lead the pack in a number of both visual reconnaissance tools, radar reconnaissance, signals reconnaissance. But Germany, Italy, and the UK, whose satellite and spacefaring intelligence platforms are more closely riveted together with the United States, they do have orbital capabilities. And that is one of the principal things that is a force multiplier for Ukraine. The move that came out of Washington to unplug Ukraine from its intelligence feed was literally the same as coming out in the fifth round of a fight and throwing a pillowcase over one fighter's head. The result was tough fighting in Kursk, retrograde actions on behalf of the Ukrainian armed forces, because the Russians jumped on that like it was a hot dog dropped at a dog show, right? They knew a blinded adversary was ripe for the picking. And bear in mind that in the meantime, only Adolf Hitler had invaded Kursk and held onto it since August. So this betrayal by Washington, that's what it is. I've called that an op-ed, absolutely what it is. Still, the Russians managed to lose 60 or 70,000 dead just in Kursk. And the North Koreans discovered that they were going to lose 40% of their forces also, even though they were fighting a blinded enemy. Long answer is, can Europe fill this vacuum, replacing, intel feed for intel feed from the United States? I'm not sure that they could, because you can remember that nations like the UK, France, and Germany to a lesser extent, but they have global commitments for their space force. Especially France has far-flung interests all over the world, in Africa, the Caribbean, the South Atlantic, other places. We'll see. Could they do it? They could do more, but this is a strategic asset, and it's a lot easier, frankly, to ship shells for the Gepard than it would be. The United States should fill the role it has traditionally filled.
Yeah, the United States should, of course, never again pull the plug on intelligence as long as the Ukrainians are, in a live battle. I have never, ever seen anything like that happen in my lifetime. I don't think there is an example from American military history where the United States has pulled intelligence. If anybody knows better than I, let me know. Interesting questions about filling the gap. If the United States indeed withdraws military support from Ukraine once again, here is a question from Trident. Can NASAMS be produced by Norway without parts from the USA? So Trident brings us to the air defense discussion. Ukraine still 1,122 days into this war needs more air defense. NASAMS, this is the system from Norway, the national standard system that Chuck will tell us more about. NASAMS has been very successful as part of the air defense network Ukraine has deployed around its cities.
Yeah, there's a long history of cooperation in missile technology between Norway and the United States. It goes back to the late 70s, early 80s with the development of something called the Penguin missile. It was a short, intermediate range anti-ship missile jointly developed with the United States and Norway, deployed only by Norway, but this was the foundation stone upon which the future cooperation was built. And, the latest fielded example being the NASM systems, which, as Alan just mentioned, is either the Norwegian standard or the national standard. It's interchangeable. This uses air-to-air missiles, basically a ground-launched AMRAAM. It's an extremely capable system. I believe that there are NASM batteries in the fight now, one or two of them that have never missed a shot. Every time they locked a target up and engaged, they hit it. It's hard for me to answer this question because I don't know at the nuts and bolts level where the components are coming from. I mean, the intended course of the Penguin program was to build an organic missile manufacturing capability in Norway. Very technically advanced country, very smart engineers. So I don't know the dynamics of where the component parts come from. I do know this. Norway has done things like they shipped 270,000 law rockets to Ukraine and announced it 6 months later. Norway has just upped their contributions, their military contributions. I think there may be more NASM systems in service in Ukraine than Norway has admitted to. I think that's great. But again, I hit the ball back to the United States. There are analogous systems in the United States that should be deployed. For example, the Hawk missile battery systems, highly mobile, frontline capable, very good SHORAD point defense systems. There are hundreds of Hawk batteries in the Arizona desert. They need to be cleaned up, resurfaced, and they should be on the ground in Ukraine.
Chuck, it's almost as if I have an earpiece with an expert talking to me. I've learned a couple of things about the NASM system. It relies on missiles made by Raytheon, one of the big U.S. defense companies, and it also uses the Sentinel radar, which is an American radar as well. This expert is saying, in the area of air defense, and I know you also know about the IRST system from Germany, some doubt about Norway's capability to scale up and produce the number of NASM systems that would be needed. But in Germany, relatively easy for Germany to scale up production of IRIST systems. And of course, Rheinmetall, ammo manufacturer and armor manufacturer, they are already building a new factory in Ukraine. The German defense manufacturers are already partnering with Ukraine and getting together not only to build new factories, but to design new weapons.
Yeah, and Ukraine has announced that it is presently producing organically 34% of what it needs to fight the war. That's up from essentially 0% when, round one, the first quarter of this football game didn't look too good for Ukraine, right? But believe me, I'm afraid we're at halftime, and I really mean that. I have been a long war guy in this. This war is not winnable right now for Russia. It isn't. They're never going to get to the Dnipro. They're never going to get to Kyiv. However, air defense is a hot button issue for Alan and I because we have been talking about it for 3 years. Ukraine selects it's so resource scarce, and it has to produce its own long-range strike weapons. They can't afford to do terror bombing in Moscow suburbs. They can't afford to waste a long-range Luti drone on a high-rise in Moscow, although they have hit some, and we can go into targeting later. Putin, on the other hand, in the high 90 percentile, every time they fire a precision strike weapon, it hits a civilian target. And that is because Ukraine has to, and that is for a reason, that Ukraine must concentrate its thin on the ground air defense systems to protect its civilian populations. And that means that highly mobile point defense and short range systems like the Gepard aren't following Ukrainian troops, aren't protecting Ukrainian convoys. They're parked in playgrounds in city centers to protect adjacent apartment buildings. And until the West opens the tap, and I'm not a Pentagon planner, but I'd like to plan top down. You've got to get control of the air defense situation in Ukraine and build out from that. And if there are any air warriors out there, people who've gone to the Air War College, they would say, for a Navy guy, I'm pretty smart. But it does start top down.
Well, Chuck, every single day, every single night, we see the cost to Ukraine of insufficient air defense supplied by its allies, and in particular, insufficient air defense supplied by the United States. So a couple of nights ago, in Kropivnitsky, over 100 drones aimed at that one city. It's in central Ukraine, about halfway between Kyiv and Kryvyi Rih. Why did the Russians target Kropivnitsky? It's because it's practically undefended. That's why. Or last night in Odessa, Russia has been targeting Odessa of late. Last night, another massive assault. The film from Odessa today showing burned out supermarkets, burned out warehouses, burned out apartment buildings. But the fires in Odessa last night, in the nighttime, looked absolutely frightening. One resident of Odessa said at the height of the attack, it was like carpet bombing. Again, Russia can only do this as long as Ukraine isn't supplied with adequate air defense.
Yep, that is exactly correct. And civil defense has been prioritized. The guys on the zero line, they're kind of on their own. And especially when you look at systems like the U.S. Avenger. This is basically a Humvee that has a 6-pack of Stinger missiles on its back and some optical guidance as well. These systems are no longer frontline stuff, but the U.S. has them in abundance. It's retro tech, but it still works. Shaheed versus Avenger, that's going to go to the Avenger every time. You just have to wonder why even prioritizing civil defense for Ukraine, why that isn't a humanitarian imperative, if not a military imperative.
Here's a good question from our good friend Francis. What message, Chuck, would you give to the White House? I only have one message for the White House. Listen to Chuck Farrer on invitations and warnings.
Yeah. Thank you, Francis, for the question. Look, I would simply say this. You can't make a deal with Vladimir Putin. You can't. This guy smears nerve gas on doorknobs in the UK, right? He poisons defectors with polonium that every scientist who looked at it knew exactly the pedigree of this isotope, where it was made in Russia, at what reactor. It was his autograph. You can't make a deal with this guy. Why don't you ask Chechnya how their ceasefire went? Why don't you ask Georgia how their ceasefire went? Why don't you ask Moldova how their security agreement with Russia went? You're not going to get anything out of Russia. The other thing I would say is come back up to 100,000 feet and ask yourself, in 10 years, how is Ukraine going to be a free and prosperous nation? Will it be a free and prosperous nation if you give Crimea to Russia and they rebuild the Black Sea Fleet? Will Ukraine be able to trade its agricultural products with the world? Will it be safe? What's going to stop Putin from taking another bite at Ukraine? Only a strong Ukraine will deter that. And I'll go one step forward. The Russian army is halfway destroyed right now. It is. How about doing this? Take the cudgel out of Putin's hand. Destroy the Russian army in Ukraine. I'm not saying do it with NATO bombs. I'm not saying doing it with NATO peacekeepers. Give the Ukrainians what they need to win this war. And I'll go one step farther. If you want to pick the best army trained in 21st century warfare, it's the Ukrainian army. It is not the United States Army. It's not the British Army. It's not the German Army. It's the Ukrainian Army. They're the home team. Give them what they need to win.
Chuck and I are going to focus on the drone and electronic warfare, two sides of the same coin. Can't talk about drone warfare without talking about electronic warfare and the efforts that Ukraine in particular has made to use electronic jamming of Russian drones. Here's a question from Michael. It's timely because it addresses the Ukrainian attack on Engels Air Base. And his question is, what is the strategic effect of the destruction of Engels? Well, Engels hasn't been destroyed yet, as much as I would like to have it destroyed. But the Ukrainians have targeted Engels 4 or 5, possibly 6 times now over the last 4 to 6 months. And the timing of these attacks always interests me, Chuck.
Yeah, absolutely. I put a little satellite image up today that showed part of one of the reasons why there was a 1,500-foot brown mushroom cloud looming over Engels. When designing the base, the Russians put the fuel depot within throwing baseball distance from the aviation ordnance storage point. Looking at that big cloud, we used to do explosionology. We used to show pictures of explosions and talk about what they meant. But that big blackish, reddish brown cloud meant that high explosives had gone off. So one of the places that Ukrainian attacked were aviation storage areas, ordnance areas. So this was where dumb bombs are kept, but more germane to our point, this is where the warheads of Russian cruise missiles were stowed. These things are about generally 500 pounds of explosives. And if you've got 10 or 15 or 20 of those going off, because a Ukrainian drone flew through an open bunker door, yes, I said that, we also know 2 pilots were killed, likely in a Tu-95 bomber. The flight crew, pilot and co-pilot, were killed. They were either taxiing an aircraft or they had manned it up. Ukraine, when it has the intelligence, has the ability to time these attacks. So a taxiing aircraft was very likely a target of opportunity. but you take that airplane out and you're stopping a bomb truck from killing Ukrainian children in their beds at night. Ingalls is the equivalent of Offutt Air Force Base in the United States, which is sort of the seat and throne center of gravity of the Strategic Air Command. It's not taken out. I mean, the place has not been destroyed, but you certainly diminish the amount of air power that can be projected from there. It also sends a really resonating message to the Russians. You can't defend your principal strategic aviation complex. Think of that. That place is ringed by air defense, but Ukraine manages to subvert, deflect, overwhelm the air defenses there, and they've done it on a regular basis, Alan.
Yeah, we have another question, kind of that kind of question. Why is there a certain bridge still standing? Well, there's a huge strategic difference between Ingalls Air Force Base, for example, and the Kerch Bridge. The time will come for the Kerch Bridge, of course. And here's an interesting question from Bobo, Chuck. One really for you here, of course. Can Ukraine make a big land grab for Crimea? What will it take? You know, I remember when Zaluzhny was still the head of the army, and this was about the time, of course, that the Surovikin line of defense had been run across the top of Zaporizhia and Donetsk oblasts. We often talked about Melitopol and Tokmak as milestones on the way to Crimea. Well, the Surovikin line is still in place. There's a lot of land to cross to make that big land grab for Crimea. Do you think the Ukrainians could do it, Chuck? And what would it take?
Well, you want some preconditions before any large combined arms ground maneuver warfare operation. So first you want to set, what are the objectives? You know, what's the long-term objective? What's the intermediate objective? What are the first objectives to be taken? This is the thing right now that is retarding Ukrainian offensive operations. I'll say this, and I mean it. They cannot trust the United States. They can't trust that if they scrimp and save and get all of their logistics ducks in a row, all the beans, bullets, Band-Aids, fuel, replacement parts, replacement troops, reinforcements, everything they need to undertake a drive south, let's say from Orkiv, straight down to cut the Russian zone of occupation in half, that they're going to have everything they need to prosecute that operations. Okay, just in terms of materiel and manpower and a plan, which is actually at hand. Unfortunately, Washington sent a really negative signal to Ukraine. We're willing to blind you in the middle of a military operation to get your attention. We're willing to pull all of your intelligence and take it all away from you to focus your attention on what we're saying. Were I a Ukrainian war planner, I'd simply say, Mr. President, to my own president, not the other one, we can't operate like this, right? The last thing you want to do is be in the middle of an offensive, whether it's going well or going poorly, and have Washington do this again. And I hate to say, I don't know where the adult leadership is, right? I don't know if anyone is going to be able to talk the commander-in-chief out of doing this again. So is it capable for Ukraine to take offensive action that's going to hurt the Russians? Absolutely. And every day tactical opportunities pass. There are unit commanders in Ukraine right now who look across the zero line and say, the Russians are badly deployed. They are not in mutually supporting positions. There is a seam. I could drive through this seam. The word comes down from above. We don't have enough artillery to support you. There isn't enough fuel. We don't know how you're going to maintain that lodgment if you make it. So until the Ukrainian battle planners can plan on support, they're not going to get it. But as Alan just said, we will see Tokmak as a target, and we will see Melitopol as a target. And this war will go into Act 3 when Ukraine gets to the Black Sea and to the Sea of Azov. That is going to be the beginning of the end of this war for Russia.
And I don't think negotiations are going to shorten this war in any way, Chuck. As a matter of fact, I think there's every reason to believe that these negotiations, which haven't even started yet, by the way, these negotiations could lengthen the war. I'm going to capture a few more questions here, in just a moment. But one of the things that we promised to talk about, drone warfare and electronic warfare. The latest estimate I've seen is that 70 to 80% of casualties on the battlefield are now being inflicted by drones. This is a sea change in warfare. At one time, it was artillery that inflicted the vast majority of casualties on the battlefield. Now it's drones. Ukraine is able to produce more than 1.5 million drones a year. There are hundreds of thousands of drones deployed in Ukraine over any week's stretch of days. They are expendable. They're short-lived. They need to be manufactured in vast numbers to keep the drone operators on the front line equipped. It really has changed warfare, hasn't it, Chuck?
It really has. It used to be you're in a rifle. Well, let's talk about electronic warfare. When I was a young ensign as a naval officer, electronic warfare concerned carrier battle groups, right? They were the ones that needed to negatively inflict enemy sensors. They had the means to do it. They had specialist aircraft that would fly in the vicinity of the carrier and fritz out surface search radars, etc. If you were on the ground, that was electronic warfare was something that concerned division commanders and up. It has now gone down to the point that every rifle squad carries electronic warfare elements, and they are necessary because, as Alan just said, the thing that is going to kill you on a 21st century battlefield is a first-person drone. And we talk about this works both ways. So it used to be the two outstanding components of firepower in a rifle squad would be the grenadier and the automatic weapons man. So the guy carrying the machine gun and your grenadier. Now there's another guy in the rifle squad who supersedes both of them, and that's the 18-year-old kid who flies your drones. He is the one who has the most firepower, the most accuracy, and he can put the heat on the target. And it could be as many as it can be over the horizon, 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 kilometers away from that rifle squad. Through networked command and control, those drones can be on target. So in this sort of complex battlefield, the invisible part of the equation, the invisible battle, electronic countermeasures for vehicles, electronic warfare to convince the enemy's countermeasures that they are effective when in fact you're homing in on them. It is moves within moves. It's kind of the battle of the mega geeks, right? And you think about everything that goes on. signals intelligence, traffic analysis, recording the enemy's own countermeasures, frequency hopping, and it is a battle that goes on. There is a Canadian Twitter account called Grandpa Roy. And I don't know Grandpa Roy, but I expect he was a former practitioner of electronic warfare. Some of his stuff should probably be classified, but if you could follow him, I reposted one of his tweets today, and it discussed not nuts and bolts detail, but how Ukrainian electronic warfare systems now are following Russian countermeasures frequency for frequency. As the microsecond they change, they meet it. And these systems, like I said, used to be deployed from aircraft carriers, specialist aircraft, specialist air crew, very highly classified missions. Now it's down to the level of the guys with the dirt under their fingernails, shooters in a rifle squad. And that's incredible, Alan.
Yeah, I think that the real technological race in this war is in drone warfare. It's why the Russians, I believe, actually were the first to test and then deploy the fiber optic controlled drones. But Ukraine caught up very quickly. Ukraine also discovered a flaw in those fiber optic drones that Russia widely used in Kursk, by the way. But the flaw was the strands of fiber optics reflected in the sunlight. The Russians always, of course, attack during the day, just like the sun reflects through a spider's web. So it was easy for Ukrainian soldiers to follow those fiber lines right back to the operator and send their own drone to that position, take care of them.
Yeah, it was that simple too. Amazing.
What else do you expect from drone innovation, Chuck? Or maybe a better way to ask that question is, what are the drone innovations to date that have most impressed you? I know that ranges are growing longer and longer. The drones themselves are able to carry larger and larger charges. But what has impressed you the most?
Well, the evolution of a unique naval weapon, the unmanned surface vessel. There were remote control boats used by the German small battle bands, naval special warfare in World War II. They were limited by HF radio. And they were pretty crude, but they were designed to be steered in the vicinity of the enemy. The pilot bails out and another boat guided it into the target. What we've got now in terms of unmanned surface vessels for Ukraine, they have defeated the Russian Navy in the Western Black Sea. These vessels can not only hunt down and take out Russian surface combatants, now they can approach the shore, open hatches, release drones, aerial combat vehicles to prosecute targets ashore. We have seen that their naval drones are now capable of firing surface-to-air missiles, on and on. That is a naval development that is truly epoch-making. But I think developments that are impressive to me are network series of control, a truly networked flight control system so that one drone can be flown out, handed off to another controller, handed off to another controller, and the targets can be prosecuted over the horizon. And it's communications that make that possible. We have yet to see any real drone swarm attacks. We have seen large numbers of Ukrainian drones converge on a target in multivalent attacks, different types of drones, all attacking from different points of the compass. We will eventually see truly a swarm of Ukrainian drones, 100 drones interoperable, flying their own algorithms to approach and swarm targets in an algorithmically determined engagement. For example, there are platforms that do that now. The British Brimstone missile, you can fire them from the back of what looks like a moving truck. 4 of them can go out towards the target talking to each other. One can literally say, you go to the north, the sun is behind me, you pop up and come out of the sun, and I'm going to go straight across the parking lot. That's pretty scary because it's happening at 2 times the speed of sound. But those systems, they cost hundreds of thousands of dollars per missile. And these drones, they don't cost very much at all. They cost $1,000. And if you deliver 6 ounces of C4 in a shaped charge, you're going to mess up whatever you hit.
Ukraine was the very first military in history to create a separate branch specifically for drones. So there's a UAV branch of the Ukrainian military. One would think the United States might want to model a new branch of the military on that instead of creating a space force, but who knows? Look, is the United States as advanced as Ukraine is in drone innovation or developing drone warfare tactics?
I don't think so. A little earlier we said, in my estimation, the most effective 21st century battle force is the Ukrainian army. The United States has the resources. We've got the areas to train. I do know that Army Training and Doctrine Command is watching the Ukrainian war very carefully. They are looking at the developments. But frankly, does the United States Army have forces right now that are capable of daily operating as many as 10,000 drone operations a day and completely having drone operators integrated into the force package? I don't think so. I can tell you this, that at the beginning of this war, had the United States Navy been trying to control the Black Sea, they would have had a problem with Ukrainian unmanned surface vessels. And their only defense would be perhaps some electronic warfare where the learning curve is vertical. And the last line of defense, as we have seen from the Russian Navy, are sailors on deck with machine guns. And that isn't really what you want to have for a line of defense. We also see this, there are radar-guided autocannons on most surface combatants, and they're designed to pick up incoming threats and tear them to pieces with depleted uranium rounds. But they're designed to shoot down transonic cruise missiles. So when the threat is coming at you at 35 or 40 miles an hour, instead of twice the speed of sound, the gun's not interested in it. So these are the developments that Ukraine, it would have taken the United States Navy a decade to come up with this stuff and integrate it and put it in. The development cycle for a generation in Ukrainian naval drones was 10 weeks. You have followed those infographs, Alan. We've been doing them for a long time. Every 10 weeks, the capability of those things doubled, tripled, quadrupled. So are we up there yet? No, I don't think so.
Actually, I think that Ukraine even shortened that 10-week generational development calendar. I think it was less than 10 weeks with the Sea Babies not only being able to go farther, but carry larger charges. And now, of course, the submersible unmanned sea drones, the drones at sea that carry UAVs and launch them off the shores of Crimea. The Ukrainians are damn smart. And that's why I always say they're not just developing new drones. They are developing all the drone tactics that go with specific missions that the Ukrainians dream up for them. Whether it's that 100% drone land attack on Russian positions several weeks ago. Again, a first in warfare, thanks to the Ukrainians. Not a single soldier attacking these Russian positions, only robotic land drones.
Right. And, and they almost pass unremarked. These things that have never occurred in warfare, right? So the Germans had some remote control boats, and so did the Japanese. They made no impression. Here, they changed the complexion of naval surface warfare in the Black Sea, an asymmetrical, technologically driven development that nobody saw. The United States Navy, look, they have drones, sea drones and persistent sea drones and submersible drones, but they are used mostly for reconnaissance, essentially, is what they've been used for. There's never been an application like this. Think of what it would have taken for the United States to start fielding first-person drones as anti-armor weapons. First of all, you have to convince the lobbyists at Raytheon that you're not going to be buying any $250,000 Javelins anymore. You want 250 FPV drones with warheads on them. It would have taken the technological inertia of the United States it's glacial. But we've seen in this war how quickly it changed and how important it is. And note should also be taken by the United States that the Russians didn't sit there sucking their thumbs. They moved almost as quickly as the Ukrainians. They were always in reactive mode. Russia has yet to show me that they've jumped the shark. They haven't advanced the ball, but they've been very quick to realize that unless they got into this game, they were going to be hurting. And they are hurting. But they learn.
I'm going to continue scrolling through some of these questions. They're not all military questions. I hope some of you farther back in the conversation are still listening. From a kid in Jersey, why did the Department of Justice withdraw support, American support, from the team investigating Russian war crimes? Kid from Jersey, I can't tell you, but it's a damn good question. This is an international team, partly based in Ukraine itself, but a team of lawyers and investigators around the world that are gathering first-person testimony of Russian atrocities and war crimes, that are gathering evidence and assembling the charges from this evidence that would be made, because Russia has committed now about 100,000 recorded war crimes in the course of this war. Some of the soldiers on the battlefield who have murdered Ukrainian prisoners of war in cold blood and filmed themselves doing it, those soldiers can actually be identified and found and sent to The Hague for trial. Those Russian soldiers also who beheaded Ukrainian prisoners of war, they can be found, tried, and sentenced. But why did the United States withdraw its lawyers and investigators from this team? I have no idea. Why did the United States shut down the Yale University tracking project of the hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian children who have been kidnapped and deported to Russia? Not only did the Trump administration shut that child tracking project down, the evidence of 20,000 individual Ukrainian children potentially deleted and destroyed. And this means that one by one, these 20,000 Ukrainian children walk alone into the Russian wilderness. They will never, ever be found and recovered now. Why is the Trump administration taking such steps? I don't know the answer. I wish I did. It only assists Putin, who has been indicted as a war criminal specifically for the deportation of Ukrainian children. It makes that crime almost, untriable. Every war crime committed on the battlefield, every war crime committed in Mariupol, every war crime committed in Bucha and Irpin and in Kherson, in torture chambers we know nothing about in occupied Ukraine. The inability to gather the evidence and to have the first-person testimony of the victims of these crimes, that is the only thing that enables Russian atrocities to be prosecuted. And it's the only thing that enables Russian war criminals to be brought to justice. So why is the United States withdrawing its support? I don't know, Chuck. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, I could probably add some invective, but you've summed it up completely. Jersey Kid, there is a little light remaining, and that is that Europe continues these investigations. We know now that the execution of unarmed Ukrainian prisoners of war, it's not an aberration. This isn't something that happens occasionally. This is a matter of policy. I will remind our Russian listening guests, you have received an unlawful order if you are told to execute a prisoner. There is no excuse. Nuremberg established that. You are not obligated to carry out an unlawful order. That's between you and your commander. You can deal with that, but you're not off the hook because you've done that. I note that Finland has given a life sentence to a Russian Special Operations Force commander who was personally responsible for the murder of 25 Ukrainian prisoners of war. I don't want to get too graphic about it, but that's a couple of magazine changes for your pistol, right? This is the enemy. And I will add to what Alan said, look, there is a despicable crime going on by Russia, and that is the abduction of Ukrainian children, and they are scattered throughout the Russian Arctic and Siberia. They have been trafficked. These are innocent children. Why the United States would pull out from this while it is doing the same thing and saying they're concerned about other children nationwide, they're concerned about their own children. I wish I could answer this one, but I don't think it needs elaborating on. It's indefensible.
It is indefensible. Look, as long as Trump is in office, the tune is not going to change. We simply don't know how sour the tune is going to become and how off-key Trump is going to go. I've been asking people, Chuck, as you know, even in the supermarket aisle, I'll stop and ask someone, do you feel safer with Donald Trump as commander-in-chief? I don't.
Well, it's hard to even, everyone knows I do like quadruple backflips not to touch on American domestic politics. I think I can comment on what the Ukrainians feel. They feel they don't have a partner in the United States, and why should they? in my military experience and in my experience as a contractor, and goes the last 35, 40 years of my life, I've been associated with national security affairs in the United States. I have never once heard of anything like this intelligence pause. It has never happened in my experience. Why it happened? That can be argued over, but no one can argue about the effects. It was the collapse of the Kursk salient and also the cost of Ukrainian soldiers all along the zero line, because Ukraine does not have parity with Russia anywhere along the zero line. It's only the adroit handling of intelligence information that allows Ukraine to take its dispersed and inferior forces and converge on the Russian point of attack. That's the only way that they can stay in the fight. They converge, they break up a Russian attack, then they disperse. When you take away the primary impetus for that dynamic military action, when you blind them, when you don't allow them anymore to know that the Russians are concentrating a force, it's coming to the jump-off point, and this is the likely point of attack, then you're handing a win to the Russians. And that's what happened.
Well, Chuck, what would indications and warnings be without a look at some maps, right?
We got the maps, Alan.
We do have the maps. I alerted Thomas in the background. I haven't yet seen a thumbs up here, but Chuck, you put up a new map today, 21 March, from Kupiansk. And you and I have kept our eye on Kupiansk for some time. I'm certain that that Thomas will get that map up for all of our viewers as well. And the high ground of Petropavlivka, which is right in the center of the Kupiansk map, often also plays a central role in Ukraine's successful defense of this city.
Yeah, and when we do have the map here, so Petropavlivka is a little town. It's about 3-4 kilometers out of downtown Kupiansk. As Alan says, if you screw into the map right there, you can see a series of hills, both to the north of Petropavlivka. You go to the south and it sort of plains off. Then there is a sloping hill down to a river, and the river is circumscribed by steep bluffs on either side. The Russian goal here is to get to the H-26 highway and take a bit more of it. You can see just to the east, rather to the west of Petropavlivka, and again, the zero line goes back and forth. It looks like in the latest plot that Russia is actually in control of a little piece of the H-26 there. They're certainly within range, even going east of Petropavlivka. The H-26 is exposed to Russian fire, but Ukraine has been able to keep the Russians in Petropavlivka. They have not gotten to the H-26 south of there ever, in my recollection. Interesting thing happening on this map, though, Alan, as you can see, if you go down the H-26 to the southeast, there at Stepova Novoselivka, Ukraine has actually penetrated the zero line and are in contact north of the H-26. And again, another attack in Russian territory in Pyshane. So this is a place where Russia has basically only kept the lines as they were. And I am never tired of revisiting the glorious day that the Russians tried to reach the Oskil River south of Kupiansk, and they lost 800 men in 20 minutes when a battalion-sized formation of Russian vehicles was annihilated. When you smoke 800 Russians in 20 minutes, It is a disaster. Now, none of these attacks on this map are any larger than the typical Russian attack, platoon or company sized. And again, it's good that Russia fights platoon or company sized. They have a battalion sized, brigade sized element. The Russian commanders are very afraid to roll the bones on anything larger than a company. And periodically, when they do try a larger scale evolution, as they did south of Kupiansk, and it comes to grief, that's a good reason for them to think twice. So again, Russia not advancing the ball here in Kupiansk, and the Ukrainians, who are, I will again point out, they are outmatched in terms of manpower and materiel, but they're holding their own, Alan.
Yeah, Chuck, as I so often do, I pulled out a map of Kupiansk to compare, and just at random, pulled out your map of Kupiansk from 29 January. So that's almost 2 months ago. It hasn't changed much. It really hasn't changed at all. A half kilometer here, half kilometer there. This demonstrates to me that all the Russians can do is attempt to grind forward and fail, as they are failing on the outskirts of Kupiansk. And you point out every single time, Russia outnumbers and outguns Ukraine just about everywhere on the zero line.
Yeah, again, we're talking with Professor Menon again, and I don't want to give away that interview, but we did talk about the information space surrounding this war. And so many people, and even Dr. Menon was saying, some of his own colleagues, well, this war is lost for Ukraine. They're never going to win it. The Russians are, resurgent everywhere. It categorically isn't the truth. That isn't what's happening. I posted a little video put up by a Russian soldier. His words, folks, not mine. I'm going to get my rifle and I'm going to kill the commanders, and we're all going to go home. This isn't a one of. This wasn't just Psycho Kitty who got on the phone. Colonels have been torn apart limb by limb by their subordinates. You had a Russian airborne division south of Kherson held to a standstill by 400 or 500 Ukrainians on the south bank of the Dnipro. Russia's combat efficiency is garbage. I say this all the time. I want everyone to get this tattooed. You drive 100 Russian vehicles into contact with Ukrainians, 38 of those vehicles open all their doors and the crew runs away. They can't win. That's why you're lucky as a Russian if you have a T-62 tank backing you up, made in 1962, right? Even their T-90, their most vaunted tank with French optics and thermals, it gets eaten alive by Ukrainian first-person drones. Every time you see one of the Russian turtle tanks, try to imagine yourself driving down the 405 freeway with all of your windows blocked. The gun can't even train. This is just nonsense. So the Russians are into an imperial war that they're losing. And I say this a lot. This is 1970 in Vietnam. The United States has not lost yet, but the brighter bulbs at the Pentagon know the war's unwinnable with the sort of army that the United States had. This war in Ukraine is unwinnable with what's left of the Russian army. Not the army they have, what's left of it.
But it could be very winnable for Ukraine if only they were fully armed and equipped. The United States itself promised to arm 10 brigades of the Ukrainian army. Only 3 ended up being fully armed. That is the shortfall of military supply promised. to Ukraine and never delivered. Chuck, we've been here for about 90 minutes now. I want to thank every one of our viewers, every single person who asked a question. I got to a lot of those questions, probably not all of them. I need a different pair of glasses. Some of the questions were simply too speculative for me, but they were good questions. Could the fire at Heathrow Airport, for example, have been arson set by the Russians? The Russians are fighting a hybrid war in Europe that we know already includes cutting communication cables and energy cables on the bed of the Baltic Sea. I don't know, Chuck, is it so far-fetched that the Russians set that fire that shut down Heathrow Airport?
Well, they were willing to smear Novichok nerve gas all over a doorknob and poison a poor woman, a civilian not involved with the hit in Salisbury. They contaminated, I'm not going to say half of London, but they contaminated a hotel, a restaurant, and 2 airliners. Look, they're willing to do anything. I will watch the Heathrow thing closely. If I could get a picture of what the transformer looks like, I could make a determination. But is that possible? It was the first thing I thought this morning when I heard the news.
Another question, and I'll try to wrap up with the last few questions. Any chance do you think, Chuck, that Russia will recover a foothold in Syria or in that part of the Middle East, anywhere?
No, I really don't think so. But their primary negotiation tool right now is money and promising arms to the new Syrian government. Bear in mind that Tartus is a very important naval base for Russia. It's also an intermediate stop to Russia's growing slave empire in Africa. And why did I say slave? You have got cadres of Wagner Force troops, and what they do is they enable African dictators to enslave tens of thousands of people to work mining natural resources, which then go to Russia. I think the Syrians now know precisely what that base is worth. And frankly, this was a huge reversal for Russian arms and Russian geopolitics. But watch for the Syrians to be extremely pragmatic. And there's a lot of Russian weapons that they would like to get their hands on. I'm talking anti-ship cruise missiles. I'm talking about S-300 weapon systems. That's what Putin has to trade, and the Syrians have the upper hand right now.
Chuck, I think we're going to bring things to a close here on the very first live indications and warnings on YouTube. I want to thank everyone who watched, who participated, listened, came with questions and insights. Wasn't able to read everyone's question and all the observations they had, but I can tell you one thing from surveying the comments in the sidebar here. We have a lot of folks, Chuck, who support Ukraine as strongly as you and I do. We have a lot of folks here as worried as you and I are about the destruction of American alliances that have been built over the last 80 years to keep not only America safe, but to keep the world relatively safe and to promote prosperity that can include tens and tens and tens of millions of more people, all thanks to America's alliances, America's military strength and the international rule of order built up so painstakingly over the last 80 years.
Yeah, one would only hope. But I do want to thank everyone for joining us. I want to thank Thomas for making this possible. This is something we're going to do more often. Alan and I, since the bullet point days, this whole thing was set up to engage with the audience and to help you, find answers. If we don't know a question, man, we will tell you where to look. But we want to hear from you as well. So I hate to say subscribe and like and everything else, but I will ask you to do this. Tell your friends. Tell your friends and watch Alan's feed and my feed, and we'll tell you when we're going to come on. But please do join us. This is the reason we're doing it. We want to help you dominate your own information warfare microcosm, and we want you to win the debate at the cocktail party, at the dinner party, at the pub, and help some people understand the importance of what's going on in Ukraine and why it matters to us.
We'll be back next week with more recorded shows of indications and warnings, more maps, and yes, Chuck and I will be back live once again right here on indications and warnings on the Information Warfare Initiative. Until then, please, everyone here, join Chuck and me as we say, Slava Ukraini.
Heroyam Slava.